Hey, it's Tia Zirkar. I voice Sabine on Star Wars Rebels, and you are listening to the Knights of Ren.
The Knights of Ren podcast is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., your source for Star Wars Destiny singles, sealed product, and more. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.
Show me again the power of the darkness.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll. D20radio.com.
Breathe. Just breathe. Now, reach out. What do you say?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Knights of Ren podcast, episode 216. And boy, are we excited to be introduced by Sabine Wren herself. We had a ton of fun at Celebration here in Orlando. And with me this week are Rick and Jay. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Not bad.
Awesome. Let's just get right into it. Celebration happened. It was 4 days of Star Wars. And of course, we're fans of the movies, but I was there covering Destiny, a little bit of the con, but mostly any and all Destiny stuff that I could, and it was so much fun. FFG had a booth on the show floor where they were showcasing mostly Destiny, like half of the booth was Destiny. There were a couple tables for X-Wing, there was a table for Armada and Rebellion, but that line for Destiny was so long. Every day it was just crazy. Tons of people were coming by, asking questions, learning games. I mean, we took pictures. You saw it on our Facebook and Twitter feeds. There were just nonstop people asking and watching. They'd come by and see like Star Wars and cards, and then they'd see dice rolling, and they'd start asking questions. And if anyone says the game is dead, that is absolutely not true. There was so many people who never even heard of FFG, and they just came by and they fell in love with the game. I got to play with lots of folks, and it was wonderful. And so many people were like, how do I buy this game? Where do I go? And, it's like, go get your starter decks at your local game store. Spirit of Rebellion's coming out in a few weeks. And everyone was just so happy and so excited that, they've seen these movies, and they've seen, Rey, the new trailer for Last Jedi. And now you can play with her and her card. And, villains are like, you could play as Kylo. Oh my gosh. I mean, excitement levels were high. People just loved it. And I thought it was wonderful that Destiny just got a ton of support from people who were gamers, who weren't gamers. If you check out the Celebration video that wrapped up the whole convention, you see a few seconds of Destiny being played, and it was really awesome. It's getting much more mainstream media, and a lot more people are getting exposed to really an amazing game that's out there right now.
So you get to sit down and play a little bit too?
Yeah, outside of the teaching games and, meeting new people, there was a game room upstairs in one of the hall floors. And so you could play a staff member. And they had some very interesting decks. I wouldn't be surprised if these are going to be very similar at Worlds during the staff challenge. And the challenge was, if you could beat a staff member, you could win a pack of Spirit of Rebellion. So I got to get my game in with a gentleman named Zach, and he pulled out a single Jabba, single Unkar Royal Guardian deck. And we've talked about that before internally. And I built something overnight before I went to the con, and I'm calling it the Hungry Hungry Hippos. It's double Jabba and it's double Unkar. And I did beat him. It was kind of close, and I say that because I hard casted both Crime Lords, and every turn I had 6 or more resources. He just happened to keep getting removal on my Crime Lord, so I wasn't able to Crime Lord him until about turn 6 when I double Crime Lorded for the win. But I was also milling him out, so if I didn't Crime Lord him that turn, he only had 1 turn left, and it was... Oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't double Crime Lord him. I hit the Guardian, the Royal Guard, on like turn 3, and then I kept trying to get my Crime Lord off because I had the money, but he had so much removal, and then I was able to double Unkar, double Jabba, and win with 10 resources. I still had 2 left, by the way, so it was just it was a mean deck. One of the cards I put in there, people didn't expect, and I did it for Jay because I know I'd be super proud. Jetpack is actually one of the key components to Hungry Hungry Hippos, and when you roll it, people don't actually understand why you're playing that card, but you're playing it because of Unkar, and you're also playing it because of its utility. So the +2 and +3 are obviously die faces you eat with Unkar. I am running Holdout Blasters in the deck just in case I need to capitalize on some quick damage, because people tend to see Holdout Blaster and Jetpack and freak out, and so they remove those dice, but they don't remove my Discard, Disrupt, and Crime Lord. And so it's really fun because if they remove my utility support, then I can poke them in the face for like 5 damage. And if they remove my damage, I can eat away their resources. So it's not a nice deck by any means. But the other thing that you're definitely using the Jetpack for is the 2 shields. Both characters are fairly squishy, and being able to either roll the 2 shields naturally or focus into the 2 shields with Jabba and Unkar, it's actually very frustrating for opponents because you're constantly mitigating damage, and your deck doesn't do much of anything in terms of damage, but it can sustain fairly well with some good shield rolls. So also, what a lot of people didn't expect is that you can roll the special and get shields, but there are people who are playing melee decks, especially with the new Vibro Knife coming out, and the special on Jetpack does eat Vibro Knife, so it's a weird kind of control/sustain effect. So basically all the sides on Jetpack are usable for the deck. You can either eat the +2 and +3 for Unkar's effect, you can use the shields to sustain, you can make the money, or you can use the special to either create shields or control dice and create shields. So it worked well. People really were confused about it, and then when they saw it in play, they're like, oh my goodness, like every side on the Jetpack is like on deck when Unkar's alive. If he dies, it's a terrible card. You definitely overwrite it. But as long as Unkar's alive, Jetpack is actually a pretty scary card, because when you roll like double +3s, you can eat 2 dice and steal 2 cards from your opponent's hand. That's pretty huge. So that was definitely one of my favorite things, is throwing Jetpacks on Jabba. I had in the game I won in my staff challenge, I had double Jetpack on Jabba, so he was like flying super high in the atmosphere, just like throwing shields on people, and like, oh, it was hilarious. So
what'd you get out of that pack?
I pulled a Baze, and of course, I posted that, and people were saying, Baze is terrible. Why would you, want Baze? I'm like, hey man, Baze is actually pretty good. He's got high numbers. His health is fairly good, and if you throw an overkill on him, that +1, +2, and +3, it's not a joke. That's a really good card. So I think I have some janky builds for Baze that I'm going to be testing once Spirit of Rebellion comes out and I get my hands on certain cards. But I actually talked with Lukas about the jank deck, and I'll just say it's supposed to be 1 Baze, double hired gun, and I'll leave it at that. But we had a really long talk about the deck, and he thought it was going to be very interesting. So yeah, I think Baze is going to be a lot of fun to kind of mess around with in very unusual ways. But if you look at his dice, that's really what I like about him, is that his numbers are really high. And I'm not specifically focusing on the damage, I'm specifically focusing on the numbers, because he's red hero, and you put C-3PO in, and you can filter those numbers into whatever you need them to be. And so you can take a character like Baze, which people look at on the surface and think, well, these numbers and these point costs, it might not be optimal. But if you can filter them with C-3PO, Baze can become a 3 discard, or a 3 disrupt, or a 3 shields, or a 2 shields, or whatever you want. Like, he's got the numbers that are high enough that in a filter, you can turn them into very powerful options. And so I'm going to work with it and try and capitalize on that, especially with him and the high numbers on the hired guns, being able to roll them out and then turn them into surprise die faces. I think that'll be very interesting, and people won't be expecting it. When I was playing the staff challenge, you're going to see these similar decks, or these decks, when you play the devs during Wednesday's side events. So they had some really fun decks, such as there's a Qui-Gon Rey that does some really interesting things. I played against Poe and Maz with Lukas. I didn't win that one. I was really, really close, but that was a really fun deck to see go into action, because, Poe rolls potentially really high damage, and then you roll Maz, and you can just resolve all kinds of things. And if Poe doesn't roll well, Maz has focus, so you can roll a bad Poe, you can roll Maz, get double focus, so you can focus 1 Poe into a special and then hit someone in the face, because you're allowed to resolve up to 2 of your dice. So it's a really, really bursty deck that is very consistent. There's obviously a Palpatine deck, and that was so much fun to play against. In casuals, I got crushed by it because that that deck is just really, really strong against mill and choke. So not being able to deal damage was really difficult because milling out the Emperor doesn't matter because he's just resolving dice and dealing damage so efficiently. So I'm going to have to figure out how mill deals with the Emperor. And then I saw there's a Krennic deck with a Death Trooper. There's some other decks that you're going to see at Worlds. Once again, all these are the challenge decks. So at Celebration, if you beat a dev, you got a Spirit of Rebellion booster. If you didn't, you had to get back in line and try again. So all of them were built primarily with Spirit of Rebellion stuff. There's a little bit of Awakenings in there, but those decks were really fun to watch because it gets your mind kind of going about what am I going to see? What do these decks do? And they have so many different options from Awakenings, and it's really fun because you get to see how those floodgates open up with new cards in the set. So I'm really excited. I hope to see lots of you at the dev challenges. I'm going to be there trying to play more games and, beat Matt, beat Lucas, beat whoever I can get my hands on, and just play lots of games and get my hands on, more experience with Spirit of Rebellion stuff. So yeah, staff challenge was a lot of fun. I really, really recommend if you're there on Wednesday and you have the time and chance to play, definitely go play. Even if you don't win, it's a lot of fun seeing what some of these decks can do because it's strange. It's very different from what we're used to right now.
So you got 4 games in?
I got 3 games in. I played 3 games against staff, and then there was one time where I played with some friends and we borrowed the staff decks just for funsies.
So you got, what, 1/4 portion?
So I beat Zach, who was running the Jabba Unkar deck. So I did play Lucas one last time. I did beat him. I ran Krennic and Death Trooper, and that's the deck he picked for me because I'd mentioned I wanted to play it. And then I gave him Jin Akbar, and that was it was a close match up front. I did get lucky, and I was able to roll super high damage out of the Death Trooper with Krennic, and I was able to kill off Jin, which did make it tough because Akbar by himself, we all know, doesn't deal much damage. He did get a launch bay off, and that did cause some trouble, but I was able to overcome it. But these decks are not like anything we've seen. Awakenings, it's very different, and it's hard to go back just because there's so many more options, and I love it. And of course, Awakenings is a great set, but with this new Spirit of Rebellion coming in, there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of different ways to play a deck that has maybe more than 1 or 2 win conditions. Now, you might even have 3 or 4 different ways to circumvent bad situations. So it was a lot of fun. It was definitely a very interesting matchup since we both went in blind with decks neither of us had built. So it was just purely playing out the deck, playing as best we could with the cards we drew, and it was a lot of fun. It really was interesting.
What deck did Matt Holland have, one of the devs from FFG? He said he went undefeated.
So I asked Matt what he played at the end of the day because, going 17-0 is no joke. And he didn't play the same deck all day. He did play a majority of Qui-Gon and Rey, if I remember correctly. And the second deck he played, I'm not entirely sure what it is. But yeah, he's really good. But I believe he also built some of those decks. So he knew a little bit more about the construction and what pieces of the pie were in there. But I can say I have watched the Qui-Gon Rey deck play, and it's really powerful. There obviously is Vibro Knife in there, but there's a lot of other cards out of Spirit of Rebellion that makes that deck just very aggressive. It does a lot of unblockable damage. It shields up the characters, keeps them healthy for a long period of time. And then, of course, it can throw shields at your face for sideways damage. You can roll out Rey and Qui-Gon and just, burst out 5 to 7 damage that your opponent can't do anything about. And it's really consistent because, lightsabers numbers are high. Rey gives you action economy. You can use Qui-Gon to sustain damage. You've got good removal. So it's a really strong kind of mid-range toolbox aggro deck. Now, if you don't have your Vibro Knife, it doesn't fall off either because there's ways to keep sustaining yourself long enough to mulligan your cards out every turn, draw those 5 cards, and get into the Vibro Knife. So it's a very interesting deck. I definitely want to try building it just because of how many things it does so effectively.
Yeah, it's one that I definitely want to try out when Spirit hits. I've got so many things mulling over in my head. I'm trying to concentrate on what I want to do for Worlds and getting all the playtesting in on that. But as soon as Worlds is over, And hopefully they'll have some packs there at Worlds, and we can crack some boxes. We can start building stuff Saturday night after I win Worlds.
Yep, that sounds good. I have to give a big shout out to Andrew. You actually remind me of him. He's going to be there at Worlds, and he said the exact same thing. I would start talking about Unkar, and he's like, no, Spirit of Rebellion doesn't exist for 2 weeks. I'm like, bro, Unkar and this quarter portion and this, salvage yard. He's like, no, you can't do that. So, hey, Andrew. Some it is. So I told him I'd shout him out on the show because, we did some testing and, getting ready for Worlds. I did bring a, Worlds legal Ray, and, we were just kind of going at it. There was a couple people there who would be at Worlds. So we did some testing and just kind of talked about the game, and it was really fun. Big shout out to another guy, Cliff. He's an avid listener of the show. And there was a bunch of people who came up and they're like, are you on Knights of Ren? I'm like, yeah, I'm Sugi. And they're like, oh my gosh, I listen to Knights of Ren, and you sound familiar. So we met a couple of fans of the show, and, even if people weren't like fans of the game or anything, everyone was super nice. People were just so excited to see cards and dice and Destiny. It was a really very, very pleasant experience.
So how about the Destiny panel? There was some pretty interesting thing there, right?
Yeah. So that was a big surprise. We, weren't really sure what we were going to expect. They had said there's going to be a big announcement. Of course, that could be anything. We've got X-Wing, Imperial Assault, Armada, so on and so forth. Of course, as Destiny fans, we expect it to be Destiny related, considering that's, just such a big piece of the pie right now for FFG is, Destiny is so hot, super popular. So, they did a big intro video. It was like 3 minutes, talking about games. They talked to developers, designers, artists, the process and things of that nature. A very interesting video. But the whole thing is actually, I taped it and it's on our Facebook page. So if you want to see all these things we're talking about, it's there. They did cover a little bit of X-Wing, and, they were asking people, do you want to see prequel ships? And of course, everyone said yes. So, maybe we'll talk about it. Who knows? Wink, wink, hint, hint. And then we got to Destiny. Of course, and everyone starts, getting excited, clapping. We're all freaking out. And, they talk about, hey, Destiny's doing well. Destiny was a big hit. We had a lot of people come out to Minnesota. We had Timothy Zahn. We had, Lucas. We had the panel. We had just a ton of fun. And then they paused and said, we have a special guest for you. And of course, everyone's wondering what it is and who it is. And we get the voice actress for Sabine Wren walking in going, hey, I'm Sabine Wren. And we're like, well, what does that mean? And they throw up her card, and she starts introducing that there's a new set, and she's super excited about it, and she's just really happy to be there. And standard PR stuff, and she says hi, takes some photos, leaves, and they just kind of sit there and go, oh, by the way, we have a full art card we're going to be raffling off, because everyone got a raffle ticket when they entered. So the crowd goes wild, everyone gets excited. They gave away a box of Spirit of Rebellion, they gave away like 2 boxes of Awakenings, they gave out like 5 of these full art cards. So let's talk about the card, because the set is obviously going to be really cool, but this card is so neat. I'm so excited to talk about Empire at War. Just, great. So we have a Sabine Wren, explosives expert. She is 11 health, clocks in at 15 and 20 points. Her die faces are 2 range damage, 3 range damage, 3 disrupt for 1 resource, 1 shield, 1 resource, a blank. And her effect is, before you activate this character, you may play a weapon from your discard pile on her, decreasing its cost by 1 if it has the word thermal in its title.
Yeah, so, right now we have thermal detonator,
Yep.
and that's it for her, but luckily she's yellow, so she can make use of that. I'd have to assume there'd be at least 1 or 2 other thermals in Empire at War coming out with her to make her feel a little bit more useful. And then her stock definitely goes up at each set if they keep printing things with thermal in it. Kind of weird that it's thermal in the title, but it's interesting at least. 2 cost repeatable thermal detonators is good as it is, so even if they don't print another card with thermal in it, you still got that.
Yeah, we asked Lucas if, there were more thermal cards in the set, and he said some. So we obviously know that some are coming. Unfortunately, some could be 1 or not more than 2. So it's kind of a funny kind of thing to discuss, because, hey, there's some maybe coming, as he rolls his eyes. But I think the more interesting thing is actually the way that it's worded is, it says, before you activate this character, you may play a weapon from your discard pile on her. You can then decrease the cost by 1 if it has thermal. So you can actually reanimate, say, a holdout blaster, or, any weapon that you could cast on her without, breaking restrictions. So, if it says red character only, or, spot a blue character and there's no blue character, you couldn't do that. But you're not relegated to just a thermal card. You just get a decrease in cost from a thermal card. So it's a very interesting effect because you can use discard fodder to throw things into your graveyard and then reanimate them if need be.
And by reanimate, you just play it from the discard, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm using Magic terminology. It's kind of burnt into my head just for years and years of Magic. It's hard to say anything else because it just makes sense.
Yeah, we get it.
It's interesting, though, because the way Ambush is worded, it says when you play this card, you get the extra action. So if you take Holdout Blaster from the graveyard and put it on her, as a part of the activation, you actually get an extra action. So you should be able to activate her, bring out the Holdout Blaster from your discard pile, roll her out with Holdout Blaster, and then you have an extra action to potentially resolve that shot.
I don't see why that wouldn't work.
So it's really, really good. I mean, she's already got a 2 and a 3. And, it doesn't even matter what the Holdout Blaster has. The fact that you can roll and resolve from the discard pile, it's going to keep a lot of people off guard. And, I mean, you do have to have the money to pay for it. It's not a free reanimation. But don't forget, you can overwrite when you play things. So you can pull things out of your discard pile, overwrite it onto something for free, get the roll, and if it has Ambush, you can get an extra action to do something else if need be. So she's very interesting because of how toolboxy she is. On the surface, you think, oh, you're going to shoot for thermal cards. Absolutely. But she can do much more than that.
Something else to consider, too, that I'm sure a lot of people noticed and probably went like, why is that there? So, obviously, the most glaring die side she has is 3 Disrupt for 1. And obviously that seems really strange because it's like, well, this is only going to be useful in like very few situations. Like, my opponent doesn't have 3 money, why would I want this? But there's actually 2 reasons why this side is really sick. And that is, 1, she has 2 3-side rules for initiative, which is pretty huge. She only has 1 miss and she doesn't have a special, since specials also count as zeros. So her initiative rating is actually pretty high. So that's really great. And also, in very fitting terms, having 2 3-sides also makes her an incredible candidate for planned explosions, which is going to make her really scary. Completely fits her theme. I honestly think was the intention of this, was, can we give her another large side that isn't like super combat focused? And there will be times where that side's relevant too. Obviously, rolling both might not be great, but if you're playing planned explosion, it is. So I think a lot of people like latched onto that and were like, it's really unfortunate she has that. But I actually find that to be a strength of her die as opposed to something bad.
Yeah, I like that it's a 3-for-1, just like what Jay was going over there, but also in the fact that if my opponent's sitting on 3 resources and I roll a 2 Disrupt, I generally won't even use it because it still leaves them with the 1, unless they're obviously playing a Crime Lord deck or something like that where I just need to keep them off of resources. But, it feels so much worse to use a 2 Disrupt in order to leave them still with some amount of resources on it. And 3-for-1 means that it's not too overpowered and just being 3 for free, but it gives you an option there to clear out large resource pools, and giving it the 1 cost, keeps it from being too overpowered. But yeah, again, I think it's just like Jay said, make it good with planned explosives, make it good with initiative, be thematic without being too overpowered.
Yeah, I totally agree. And something I forgot to mention regarding the Jin deck is her effect, even though we've talked about it, even though I want a promo card and I know what the card does, it still took me by surprise when he was like, no money, Crime Lord for 0. Or I'm sorry, Electroshock for 0. And I just sat there and thought to myself, I knew this could happen, but I didn't anticipate it. And he shocked out one of my dice that I needed to resolve, and it was just like, man, I really wish I had have considered that. And so having ways to keep Jin off kilter is going to be good, because there's lots of times where you're sitting on 2 resources and that reversal is probably in their hand, and you've got to consider that even if you're dry, Jin can resolve cards really fast. So imagine having resources and being able to cast things with Jin. So yeah, keeping her dry is important, but I really think Jin is going to see a lot of play just because of how really surprising she is. There were lots of turns where she rolled 4 damage, the 2 double 2s, and then the next turn she rolled 2 double discards, and I'm like, what is going on here? I'm either taking damage or losing my entire hand. Like, like, on paper you look at her and you think, oh, that's really good. But when you face off against her and you see, 4 damage or 2 damage and 2 discard, it's like, these are extremely painful decisions to make, especially with removal. Like, do I lose options out of my hand? Do I let her deal me damage? Like, what on earth what do you do? And then she drops a card for 1 or 0 that costs more, and you're like, come on, that's not fair. So yeah, I like seeing a little bit of ways to, eat or deal damage and eat resources out of hero. So I'm excited about Sabine.
Yeah, seeing Sabine was funny because she's obviously a very cool character, and the art on that alt art is one of the best ones they've done so far. All the alt arts they showed at Celebration were really great. But the funny thing about Sabine is she was honestly one of the first times I got excited about a hero character, because I don't really play heroes, I stick to villains. And looking at that, I'm like, she's so far away. Like, I would make a deck around you, but we don't even have Spirit of Rebellion yet. This is so cruel.
I actually don't think this is an alt art. I think it's just extended because it doesn't have the usual circle on the top of the die face. Die face is to show you what die it goes with. So this may actually be some really good regular art.
That would be even better.
All right, so the big thing about this episode is, while I was at Celebration, I was able to get an interview with Zach Bunn from Team Covenant and Lukas Litszinger, who we've interviewed before on the show. And I was just able to sit down with these guys and just discuss Destiny in great detail. And the first interview I'd like to have is Zach Bunn. We talked about Spirit of Rebellion, what he's excited about. We talked about, how consistency and luck works in Destiny, considering you have cards and you have dice, and how you're able to control that as a player. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Zach Bunn from Team Covenant, and here we go. Hi, this is Sugi from Knights of Ren. I'm here with Zach Bunn from Team Covenant. How are you doing, sir?
I'm exhausted, but fantastic.
Fair. So for those of you who are listening and may not know who Zach is, can you just give us a quick rundown about yourself and Team Covenant?
Sure. So I'm Zach. I'm one of the founders of Team Covenant. We're an online and local retailer of tabletop games. We've been around for about 10 years now, and we're focused on providing access to high-quality tabletop experiences. So we do that in a lot of ways. We create content that gets people into games. We create content that keeps people engaged in games. We make products that make playing the games easier and more fun, and we offer services like subscriptions to, LCG packs or Waves of X-Wing or boxes of Destiny, and so we're focused on effectively doing all the grunt work so that people can just focus on playing games and having fun and connecting with people.
Awesome. So we're sitting here at Celebration, and we just got out of the FFG panel, and they announced a lot. And I'd love to get your thoughts. Just a quick overview of we've seen Sabine, we've seen some new stuff from the set. They're definitely going to be making this game much larger. What do you think about it?
I'm super pumped. I'm a big fan of the Star Wars Rebels show. I think the art looks great on Sabine. The card itself looks fantastic. Empire at War sounds like an awesome set, right? That was the name of it.
Yeah.
And I'm really hopeful. I'm a huge fan of Ahsoka, so I'm hopeful she shows up. But we'll probably get Kanan and Zeb and Ezra and Hera and Agent Kallus. And we know Thrawn's in the third set. They announced that way back. He's also in Rebels, so that makes sense. So I'm just really excited. I mean, Spirit isn't even out yet. I'm pumped about that. We had the pre-release. I've seen most of the cards, and doubling the character count, doubling the card pool is pretty cool. And then knowing they're obviously already ready with the next set. So I'm just super pumped. We're playing with a very limited card pool right now, so I can't wait until a year, 2 years down the road when you have a full 6 sets, just kind of out, and you have a bunch of cards to play with.
Right. And so speaking about that, we're going to be seeing you at Worlds, and people are getting ready. And one of the big questions, we definitely want to ask you is, when you're looking at the game, can you discuss a little bit about luck versus consistency? Because the game is full of dice and cards and a lot of variance, and people are trying to wrap their heads around getting ready for Worlds. What can you say to help someone understand that there is luck in the game, but it can be controlled by good plays and good decisions?
Sure. I think depending on the game, right? Like if you're just playing a literal D6 dice game and there's, we both roll a die, right? Whoever rolls higher wins. There's no skill in that, right? So you introduce a bunch of elements in a game like Destiny, and dice adds the random element or a random element of the game, which obviously creates the excitement and the tension of the game. What are they going to roll? What can they roll? What are the possibilities? And so there's a lot of things dice do in a game, and we actually just spent a whole episode of our podcast talking about this. Not specifically to Destiny, but in general. But I think a better, maybe more tangible example for Destiny is, to me, the difference between a Hanrei deck and a Django Trooper Bala deck, right? Two very popular decks, I think, in the game out of the first set, something you see a lot of people talking about. And so to me, I think that the Hanrei deck is better. And the reason I think it's better is because I think it's more consistent. It more consistently does what it does. But on the flip side, there are games that the Django Bala Trooper deck has a much higher spike, and it is much harder to do anything about when that happens. So Jetpack goes on, Django, and they roll 2/2 +3. It's a pretty good opening. And they just do the damage, right? 7 damage straight up. It's like turn 2, they put a Holdout Blaster on Balatik, and you go, Django rolls in, rolls lethal. And it's like you activate Bala, kill one of their characters, stand Bala. It's like that's a very optimal situation, right? Especially if you aren't able to get enough damage on Bala to kind of get him prepared to be off the board. And when that happens, like when they spike, when Django spikes, I prefer actually Django Trooper to Django Bala Trooper, because I think it is more consistent. It does what it does more consistently. You have more removable options with like best defense, and you just have these mitigation effects. But effectively, Destiny is about the dice, what they do, what they're on the board doing. And so when it comes to controlling dice and curving luck, that is kind of the whole point, where it's like the decks that are most consistently providing the most output are the decks that are going to win. And decks do that in very different ways, whether it's Jabba Dooku that's trying to discard the deck and just live long enough to win in that way, and constantly getting rid of your hand, right? So you don't get rerolls, and they're controlling the luck. Versus control decks that literally just remove the dice, whether it's prized possession or soft control like isolation or feel your anger or whatever. And so, I think what I've seen, I played a lot of Destiny, and the more consistent decks, the more consistent players tend to win more often, right? The more consistent.
Yeah.
And so I think what's really cool, what I'm excited about, is the format that FFG is using for their World Championship, for their tournaments, which is Swiss rounds. Because it's a shorter game, I'm hoping we see a decent number of rounds where you have a lot of players, so you can actually have 7, 8, 9 rounds. And so the odds of, because it is possible, right? Like theoretically, you could play a game of Destiny and only roll blanks. It's possible that happens. And if it happens, there's no amount of skill that will play out of that, unless you're playing Jabba Dooku, maybe, I guess. Like I don't know what that looks like, but effectively, there is a possible way that dice could literally lose you the game completely because you didn't ever do anything except roll blanks. But that's very rare, right? So when you have 9 games in a Swiss, or 7 games, or 8, or whatever, the odds of the dice really having a drastic impact, like it starts evening out over time. In the same way that if you flip a coin 1,000 times, it probably gets pretty close to 500. So that's kind of the idea of a tournament, is you run a deck and you're seeing how consistent are you against the field at doing what you do and knowing how to make the right moves and whatnot. But then the next layer of it, and I'm going on at length about this, the next layer of it is the top cut structure, which I love because it's best of 3.
Yes.
So I've played games, lots of games in the past, like X-Wing's one. It's kind of a longer game, so you can't do best of 3 in the cut. And there are games that I've watched or played in those situations where if you lose, you're out, or if you win, you keep going, that are heavily dictated by the results on the die, right? There's a damage curve typically in most of these games, and in X-Wing, if you get ahead of that damage curve early, 2 really good players, it's really hard to get ahead of the damage curve. But I think this is what comes back, where it's like in football. You have an onside kick, right? So when I'm playing Destiny or I'm playing X-Wing, there are moves that I can make that are similar to an onside kick. They're lower probability moves, but they're moves that could put me back in the game or create an advantage. And so the closer the play skill gets, the closer the deck building gets. You go into a game, and once you know I'm advantaged in this matchup or I'm not, you kind of start knowing, do I need to play conservative? Do I just need to maintain the lead to win the game? Or do I need to start from the opening kick, onside kicking? And so there's a ton of skill involved in these games, but Destiny has a best of 3 once you make the cut. So the cool part about that is, even if you get tricked by your opponent by some crazy deck, you aren't just out. Or if you have a really awful draw, or if you have a really awful rolls, you don't just lose, right? If your deck is pretty consistent and you're really consistent at playing it, odds are the more consistent, better deck builder, better player is going to win most of those games. And it's definitely possible. I mean, but that's what's exciting, right? You come to a game, you might be the Cleveland Browns of Star Wars Destiny, right? And the reality is, you can beat anybody.
Yeah.
And that's part of the excitement, right? And so by stepping up to the table and playing a dice game, you're inherently agreeing to the idea that random chance is involved. And that's part of what makes it fun, right? In football, it's like onside kick. It's literally either the best choice or the worst choice. After it's over, you get either ridiculed or praised. I remember the Saints kicked an onside kick at the beginning of, I think it was the third quarter of Super Bowl, just out of nowhere. And it was like, they didn't need to do it. It wasn't like we have to do this. But they did it, they got it, and it put them at a significant advantage in the game. And similar moves are possible in Destiny.
Okay. So I have another question.
End my soliloquy.
Okay, fair enough. We've both played games, in Magic. People are listening. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh. Consistency is one of those things that is totally different in each game. So if you're talking about Magic, mana filtering, draw, things that get you consistently the cards and tools you need. How do you define that in Destiny? Since it is a very different style of game, but we're still using. We see the game in different light because there is a way to make it consistency. How do you see that in Destiny?
Well, I think that's something that makes Destiny so fun, which is they removed a lot of the randomness up front. You start with your main characters on the board. So dice are the main, I think, element of the game. They're how you get most things done. And so typically you're starting with 3 or 4 dice on the board of your choosing. You have a small deck. So in a lot of games like Magic or Pokemon, you have bigger decks, 60 plus cards. In Destiny, it's 30. You also draw 5. And you get a selective mulligan, which is fantastic. So you get to choose what you keep, and you get to try again. So that just really increases the consistency. You also get to discard any number of cards at the end of the round and draw up to your hand size every turn. So in most games of Destiny, it's going to be 3 to 5 turns, and you're going to see 15 to 25 of your cards. So your deck should do what it does most of the time. And if what it does is inconsistently provide results, sometimes you'll hit a jetpack on Django and do a bunch of damage. Sometimes you'll not see a jetpack ever. Sometimes you'll put a jetpack on Django and not roll damage. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And so it just has a lot of built-in ways to make it pretty consistent. I found that the decks I'm playing very consistently do what they do. And if you play enough games, you'll start to recognize those patterns. And I think that's really, if you're getting ready for Worlds or a big tournament, one of the best things to do is, and that's my number one thing, is just play against a lot of matchups, play against a lot of players, play a bunch of different decks, play the same deck a lot, and you start to see these patterns recurring, right? Where it's like, well, pretty consistently I'm having this card in my hand and it's not doing anything. I don't ever have in Hanrei the money to play Mind Trick, as an example. I mean, I'm not saying you do or don't, but if you keep drawing Mind Trick and 1 in 10 games, it's game changing, but the other 90%, it's not doing anything for you. You have to start asking the question, is that really something you should do? And another thing we talked about on the podcast recently was, usually most decks in Destiny, 30 cards, 20 to 25 of the cards are kind of the core, kind of the unchangeable, what this deck does. Then you have 4 to 8 slots that are potentially changeable or like more questionable. And so usually with those 2 to 4 slots, we like to put like a piece of paper in that sleeve with the card. And when you draw that card, write down, if this could be any card in the game, what would I want it to be right now? And you write it down. And then if you draw that card in another game and you want that same card, you put a tick mark next to it. And then you play 50 games. And after 50 games, if you look at those 4 slots and you look and you say, man, you know what? I wanted Mind Trick 30 out of 50 times, but I only wanted to use the Force twice. It kind of makes your decision for you, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of ways. There's a ton of ways, different ways of play testing, and people do a lot of ways. But you start seeing that, and it's like, oh. Because people just throw a card in, right? Because everyone says you should. Electroshock. It's so good. I don't have Electroshock in a lot of my yellow decks. Because I don't have the money for it, typically.
Fair.
But it just depends on the deck and what you're trying to do and what your kind of results you're seeing. But the piece of paper in a card sleeve is a really funny way. Because if Mind Trick once in 20 games just wins a game for you, you think it's incredible. Mm-hmm. You remember that. And it's just, gosh, what's the name of that theory? Something bias. I don't know. But the idea is that you remember what made you successful, mm-hmm. but you don't remember the things that were the other direction. So in X-Wing, a common thing is I remember the roll that cost me the game, but I don't remember the 3 rolls that were against the odds that I made earlier in the game, mm-hmm. that put me in a position where that roll mattered anyway.
Very cool. All right, one last question, and we'll get you out of here. And this is always the fun one. Let's talk about Spirit of Rebellion.
All right.
What are you most excited? Like, what's your favorite card or character? Like, what do you want to talk about for Spirit of Rebellion? Like, just gets you excited.
Wow, that's a big question. Off just the cuff, the top thing is Baby Vader. I call him Baby Vader. I'm a huge fan. I love the art on Darth Vader. Is it Young Apprentice?
It's
Dark
Dark
Apprentice.
Apprentice,
Yeah. And just that like pure like hatred, anger, damage. Right. It's just like 4 sides showing damage. He's just angry, which I really like, and I really actually like Kylo from Awakenings, and he just hasn't really had a natural pair yet, and so he fits right in there with Anakin. Also the F1, F11, whatever that guy's name is.
FN2199.
That guy fits really well with Anakin too, and 2 colors is good. But I'm ultimately a blue. I like Force users and all that kind of stuff. So
Notoriously.
all the Force cards, right? Especially the dark side Force cards. I like Anger.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, that art just blows me away. It's like it's just this Kylo's mask with like some red on it. But Anger and what's the other? The 0 cost turn to a blank. Blue. You turn one of yours to a blank. They turn one of theirs to a blank.
Oh. Manipulate, I think.
Manipulate and high ground and like
Yep.
just all these control. Like I love that, and especially high ground's great because it's control that also does damage, which is those are my two wheelhouses. So, really excited about the whole set. Really excited to just have a whole bunch of new pairings of characters and twice as many card options when it comes to the deck building and battlegrounds and all that fun stuff. So, ready to see it come out. Ready to get the Awakenings reprint and. I'm really hoping that we get Ahsoka in set 3. I would die.
Oh yeah. Now, one last thing. I saw you got your Darth Vader signed by the man himself. You want to tell us a little bit about how'd that go?
It went awesome, right? So one thing I do is I get a lot of my cards signed. I like being able to display the autographs that I get. I like meeting the actors and the voice actors and stuff. So what my biggest thing this weekend was actually getting Ashley X signed, the voice actor for Ahsoka, to sign my Ahsoka playmat and my Ahsoka card from the LCG. And I luckily got that. But I also had Hayden Christensen, which I also luckily got. That thing sold out quick. And had the new Baby Vader. I was able to get one of those at the pre-release and super pumped. So got that signed. He was so awesome. I'm so happy to see him here. You know, obviously the prequels have mixed feelings associated with them, but I personally I don't put any blame on Hayden Christensen. He's a really nice guy, and he got a really warm welcome here, and the fans were just really excited to see him. And he was just, he's a really big part of the legacy. So yeah. I'm excited to see him here. It was an honor to meet him, and I will love having that on the table.
Did he know what the game was when you were like, hey, there's this card of you? Like, was he aware of what's going on?
He had no idea. I mean, he knew it was a card for a game, but they see all sorts of wild things.
Oh, that's fair. I didn't know if he played. That'd be a cool story to tell.
No, and not that I'm aware of. But he also had this insane line. So, just told him I was super happy he was here. Thanked him for being there, and told him I hope to see him at future conventions. And awesome. He was just super nice, and he seems great.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so very much. We appreciate your time and all your thoughts.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Keep doing what you do. I love the content, love the community content, and thanks for everybody that's listening for listening. Keep listening to Knights Are In, and hopefully I'll see you guys on a future episode, or you'll hear me on a future episode. I don't really see anybody.
So once again, I would like to say a big thank you to Zach for his time and his thoughts. It was just really interesting to pick his brain and see his perspective on how things work. And my favorite thing about that discussion was, putting that piece of paper in a card, with a sleeve, and using that to make a determination on, do the cards I really want in certain situations have an effect on the deck, or are they things that I just want in certain times? Because you really want the cards in your deck to do things that help move you towards your end goal. You don't want cards that are just kind of watered down. And so I really appreciate his time and his perspective on the game. And as ever before, we really love talking with Lukas Litszinger, and we'd like to introduce him in this next interview. All right, so welcome everyone. This is Sugi with Knights of Ren, and with me is Lukas Litszinger. How are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. So we are sitting here at Celebration, and you guys just talked a lot about the new stuff coming out of Destiny. I believe it's Age of Empire, is that correct?
Empire War.
Oh, that's right. I'm thinking of something else. L5R's on the brain. So we saw the new Sabine. I know you guys have got a lot of new stuff coming. You know, we've already seen Thrawn. Is there anything you can tell us more about this third set? Anything else?
Well, you took my thunder. I was going to say, well, it is the third set of the game, so it comes out after Spirit of Rebellion. But, I think you're going to see a decent Rebel presence in this set, since you need Rebels to go up against the Empire.
Okay, very exciting. And, you guys have already shown off the full art Sabine. Have you guys kind of moved away from the Arabesh cards? Because we've seen the Q2 full art cards be in English with just really great art. And then, the Q1 stuff was all the Arabesh. Can you say anything about that?
I honestly am not sure if we've moved away from that or not. I know in some cases we do like to do Arabesh because it allows us to kind of print the cards and distribute them internationally at the same time. So depending on, what the schedule looks like, what our international partners are looking for, Arabesh makes a lot of sense since then it's consistent everywhere, since you can translate any language into Arabesh and it should be the same.
Okay, that's really good to know. So talking about Spirit of Rebellion, that's going to be coming out in just a few weeks when we hit Worlds. What are you excited about? I mean, Awakenings has been a lot of fun. We've had lots of decks, lots of discussions, and we've talked about it for months. And now we're going to just open the floodgates. And you said last time we talked, you guys are going to do things a little bit more unbound. What is in Spirit of Rebellion that just gets you excited?
Oh man, there's a lot of stuff that gets me excited about in Spirit of Rebellion. And we actually are playing here at Star Wars Celebration some kind of challenge decks with some Spirit of Rebellion cards thrown in. And the deck that I've been playing a lot of is Elite Maz, Elite Poe. And so it's a pretty disgusting deck. You put fast hands down and then you roll in Maz and she resolves Podai and discard Falcons and thermal detonators and stuff. And I've had a lot of fun with that deck, but I think people are going to have to adapt when Spirit of Rebellion comes out, and they're going to have to figure out, what the new meta looks like. I don't think you'll see as much Django. I think, Django's kind of had his time in the sun, and I think you'll begin to see a couple other characters pop up there. I'm really excited to see, if people can make the Gen mill decks or discard decks work. I think that'll be pretty fun too, but mill definitely gets a little bit of a shot in the arm in Spirit of Rebellion, and so I think you'll see it taking some tournaments, and that'll be pretty exciting too. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. And specifically regarding some of the cards we've seen, we've got some people asking questions. So the big one we definitely have to ask you is Cargo Hold. Can you discuss a little bit about that? Because people want to know, if I play training and say I'm running, Palpatine at one die, TIE Pilot at one die, and I throw that training down, can I use Cargo Hold to move it over? And of course the other one is, if my buddy's got Vader kitted out at 3 equipment and I use Cargo Hold to move something over, does it forcibly overwrite one of those 3 cards?
Right. So basically the way that Cargo Hold works is it does allow you to move an upgrade, and you can move training with it, ignoring play restrictions. So even though training only plays on a red character, you can still move it to a non-red or even a unique character to make them elite. Now, you can only make a character elite one time, so if you choose an elite character to begin with, you can't actually move it over to them and then make them double elite. You can't get 3 dice on a unique character with it. You can only get 2 dice on a unique character with it. And then if they do have 3 upgrades on them, it is up to the owner of that character to decide which 3 upgrades stay. So if you move an upgrade onto a fully kitted out Vader, then the Vader player will have to discard one of them, but it is their choice. So they could discard the one you moved, or they could discard one that was already on Vader. Of course, your opponent can then kind of take it the next round and move, the training or the other upgrade back off the character that you moved it to.
Okay, very interesting. Another big question we've been seeing a lot, people are getting ready for Worlds, and, they're talking about Hyperloop. We've got things, Planetary Uprising, which can make that kind of nasty. We've talked before, and you said you're watching the forums, you're seeing people's responses. How are you going to respond to this in the future? Because, people are afraid that it might be a little bit too crazy.
Right. Anytime that you have a deck that's potentially a negative play experience, you look very closely at it. And with this game, we're going to be very proactive in our approach to kind of making sure that certain decks kind of don't get out of hand and don't see a lot of tournament play. If we think they do engender a negative play experience, we want to kind of nip that in the bud. And so you'll see, I think, a very proactive approach to it. Hyperloop and Planetary Uprising will be addressed in the next rules reference. as well as some of the perhaps infinite combos with like Outer Rim Smuggler and Return of the Jedi. So like we want people to play the game and have fun and kind of play the game a little bit fairly. And, sometimes we miss some things in our testing process, and our testing process is always improving. And so, like, hopefully there aren't too many things that slip through. But if something does slip through, we're not going to wait around for it to, like, win a bunch of tournaments. We're going to take care of it immediately.
Okay, really cool. So we sat down and talked with Zach Bunn earlier in the convention, and I have the exact same question I asked him. I want to ask you, when you're talking about Destiny, it seems like there's a high learning curve, and you were talking in the panel about there's dice and there's cards, and you've built in a way to help mitigate some of the luck, and so you feel like you have a little bit more control of how the game plays. But can you speak a little bit more on the consistency versus luck aspect and how you've designed the game so a player who may not be as experienced or who may be having a difficult time can look at the game and understand you can outmaneuver bad rolls or bad draw. You just have to understand how the game is built in order to do that.
Right. I mean, in any given game, you're going to have a run of bad luck. However, basically the design approach was to make sure that we put enough tools into the card pool to allow players to mitigate that luck, and to allow players who didn't like to have less consistency in their deck to be able to put in tools to make sure that they get the consistency that they're looking for. Now, by doing that, you usually give up something else. You give up some explosiveness, you give up some of the perhaps efficiency of your deck if you're putting in a lot of redundancy to make sure you get the results that you want. And that's one of the reasons why the focus result is potentially so good, is it gives you that consistency. So like the focus symbol as well allows you to get the result that you want without having to rely on just rolling the die. And so having that built into the dice is very important. But I think it's important to have, consistency when you have dice, but on the other hand, we do want to embrace the luck side of things too. So that if you sit down to play, it's like, oh man, I can't believe I'm playing Vader Raider, but like they could roll trash and you could still win. So even if you're a more inexperienced player, like there's always that shot that, your dice are going to come out really hot, their dice are not going to come out real hot. But I think in most cases, if you have two players with different skill levels, more often than not, the player with the higher skill level will win, and that's how we want it to be.
Okay. A similar question we asked was in regards to consistency. Each player sees consistency in a different light. So if you've played Magic, there's land, and so you need mana filters, you need card draw, you need fetching, tutoring, things like that to help get you consistently the things in your deck to play out, so you consistently have your strategy happen. How does consistently look like in your head when it comes to Destiny?
Yeah, I think the consistency of the cards is very important. So that's one of the reasons why we chose 30 cards. Because the dice are a little bit more inconsistent, we wanted the cards that you put into your deck to be more consistent and more reliable, so they can actually draw them and actually play them. And it's not like a 60 or 50 card deck where you're just kind of like searching for that card that you put in, and then you never see it. And maybe you never see it like 3 or 4 games in a row. Especially in games where you only draw like one card per turn, sometimes you're just like top decking the whole game, hoping to get a card that, would actually help you out, and then you don't get it. And so with Destiny, we wanted to make sure that the decks were small, and we also wanted to make sure that you had a means of going through your deck very quickly so that you could get the cards that you put into it. So I'm really happy whenever, games of Destiny go down toward the end and you only have a couple of cards left in your deck. It's still possible that maybe, the 2 copies of like Second Chance are at the bottom. Like I've had that happen to me before. It's like the bottom 2 cards. I'm like, I just needed one of them. And so that can be kind of, it forces you to adapt and play a little bit differently, and that can be a little bit frustrating. But for the most part, those cards are in there, you can go get them, and you will be able to play the cards that you put into your deck, which makes the deck more consistent even when the dice are not.
Okay. And in your designs, is there any specific type of mechanic that you haven't used that you're excited, you might use in the future? Like, for example, in Magic's really easy to talk about because there's so many things. Reanimation. I love black reanimation decks where you purposely mill yourself out and then you use your graveyard as the play point instead of your deck. Is there anything, unique to Destiny that you would like to put in that may or may not be in there at this point in time?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff that I want to do with Destiny that we haven't done yet. I don't want to, there's a lot of different directions you can go. Like there are things that you can do with cards, like even new card types that you could introduce. There are things you can do with dice, even like new dice symbols that you could introduce in the future. Like we've actually explored a lot of it, and we kind of have a plan moving forward about like at what speed we want to put that stuff in the game, but we don't want to put it in too fast. Like I think the key to the game in a way is its approachability, is its simplicity, and so we want to make sure that whenever we do introduce something new, like it pulls its weight and it feels like it's a necessary or at least an exciting addition to the game without adding too much to the complexity of the game. And so I think also as the game goes on, like if we keep adding some cool new mechanics to the game, you'll also see us probably remove mechanics over time as well, just to make sure that the game doesn't bloat.
Very cool. So another big thing we've seen from Spirit of Rebellion is supports. In Awakening, they weren't they were kind of slow. They weren't really fast. A lot of people complained. We've seen a lot of zero-cost supports that are phenomenal. Imperial Inspection comes to mind, Salvage Yard, Meditate. There's just a lot of these, 1 or 0-cost effects that either have ambush or they're just, hey, when you roll a symbol, something really good happens. Where did that come from? Because it seems incredibly drastic from the way Awakenings was built, where these supports are really big, they're really bulky, but they're kind of chunky, and then these are they're thinned down, they're super efficient, and they're very deadly.
I mean, I think you do have some very kind of efficient supports in Awakenings as well, like Backup Muscle comes to mind. And so, I always look at supports into two different categories. One are like the dice supports, and one are like the non-dice supports. And so the dice supports haven't seen a whole lot of play, and that's something that we're going to continue to look at as the game goes forward, and we'll probably have to bump their power level a little bit. I'm definitely scared of the potential for, a deck to come out that just runs drops 4, 5, 6 dice supports on the table, and then it just roll one at a time into the pool. So we don't want the game to necessarily go to that extreme as a tier 1 deck. So you have to be careful with how you push supports, because they do stay on the table and there is very little removal for them at this moment, and there's no removal unless you put removal cards into your deck. You can't just upgrades, you attack the character, you take out the character, it takes out their upgrades. There's removal kind of inherent to the game that isn't there with supports. So I was definitely more conservative with the costing of supports. And I think we'll be a little bit more aggressive just to make sure that, they do feel tournament viable moving forward. As far as the non-dice supports, that is something that you saw a little bit of in Awakenings, with Backup Muscle. You also see Awakening played and some other ones like that. But that just felt like an area where we could do a little bit more with it. And I like the idea of doing kind of a cycle of supports that triggered off of rolling a certain symbol on your dice. And so since the theme of the second set a little bit is consistency on the dice sides, where you have dice that have multiple symbols of the same type, then that would give you something to kind of shoot for. So if you are running a lot of Disrupt and you put Imperial Inspection in your deck, you try to draw the Imperial Inspection and just start knocking some upgrades back to hand. And so kind of doing a cycle of those, I think, allowed us to experiment with what else can supports do. They're not even action speed once you put them on the table. It's more of a response and after ability. And so that also makes them a little bit more exciting. And I think you see the costs on Imperial Inspection at 0 because disrupts in general are considered to be the weakest symbol in the game. And so the effect that triggers off of that is the strongest effect, while something that Your Eyes Can Deceive You, which triggers off shields, is a little bit weaker and costs a little bit more because shields are already good, and you actually perhaps want those shields in decks that are going to run that card. In some cases, you roll the Disrupt, and it's well, it doesn't do anything. They already spent their resources, or it's, it still changes the way they play, but it doesn't always get resolved in the way that you would like it to be resolved. And so that's why something like Imperial Inspection is important for those decks that can rely on that kind of strategy of making sure that your opponent gets suppressed in their resources.
Okay. Something I personally wanted to ask you is, in Magic, there's a lot of player interaction. There's the stack, so you cast a spell, I could counter, you can use an activated ability. The way you've built the queue is incredibly similar to that, in a way where there could be, even with the first time I saw Fast Hands with Django, I was you could roll him on your opponent's turn and resolve a die on your opponent's turn. It's the first time we've actually seen a type of player interaction with someone else's turn happening. Is there any potential for a little bit more of that as the game proceeds, or is it pretty much going to stick to your action, my action, with not much counterplay in terms of if you do something, I can respond at an instant level speed?
I don't think we'll see much more of that going forward. I think we'll see a little bit of it here and there. We have a decent amount of it in set 2, but like we're not going to put a lot more of it in. We're just going to see kind of how that plays out and how it affects the tempo of the games and the back and forth nature of the game. The thing I really like about the game is that it does feel like I always have a reaction to what you're doing. If it is action, 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 you do something, I can immediately do something to respond. So like you roll your dice in, it's not like you can resolve them immediately in some cases, and then I can do something to, knock those dice out of the pool. So it feels more reactive. By actually adding in reactions that kind of like do things on your opponent's turn, like Django, like it actually makes it less of a reactive game and more of a like I just get to like cheat my way to damage or cheat my way to the symbol that I want or cheat my way to whatever the effect is that allows me to react on my opponent's turn. And so I think in a way, by making it feel like a little bit more like I'm an interruptibility, it actually perhaps negates some of the back and forth nature of the game. And so that's why we want to be careful with it moving forward. So we'll see how it shakes out in set 2. And, I do think like Force Speed is a pretty fun card, but like it does take up an upgrade slot on your character, and you're not always going to roll that special. And sometimes you roll a special and you're like, oh, I needed it like the last time I rolled it. I don't need it anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what sort of tempo comes from things that allow you to like perhaps cheat like fast hands in Django, but I don't think you'll see much more of it until we kind of see what impact things in the second set have on the game.
Okay, and that leads to a really important question I wanted to bring up is, you got set 2 ready. It's done. You've got set 3 in the works. I'm sure set 4 is somewhere in there. How does the foresight work with, you've got 2 sets in the can, one you're probably, I would say, 70% with, and then set 4, say 10%. Like, how do you make the determination? Like, we saw Sabine. She's got an effect. She's got a point cost. She's got health. She's got dice symbols. How are you able to determine so far in advance, because, it takes so much time to print the dice, what a character is, what they do, how much their health, how do you make all the determinations on those variables where, like, it's not going to be broken, but it's going to be fun? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you make that decision?
I mean, playtesting is a large part of it. And also, like, for the first set, I kind of developed a rudimentary analysis of, like, the different strength of the die symbols and how they compare and what happens if you put them together on a die. And that can give you, like, a kind of a baseline to actually look at, to be like, how strong is this thing? When it comes to characters, though, like, how much is a point of health worth versus, like, an extra point of damage on their die? Like, that's obviously a somewhat subjective question, because, like, you could run thousands of simulations and still not come to a good conclusion about which one is better when you have so many variables happening in any given game. So you try to get it in the ballpark, and then you kind of use your intuition and like the playtester feedback to get it close. But it is challenging because we do have to lock in the dice much longer than we would for a regular card game ahead of time. And so that actually does make it more challenging to work on this game than some other games, just because of the long production process to make those dice. We don't have, quite as much time with, getting reactions from the previous sets before we start working on the next set. So like set 2 was completely finished before like set 1 ever released. And so, set 3 was kind of our first chance to kind of put some stuff in there based on what we were seeing with like set 1 coming out. And then set 4 was like the first time we started from scratch after like set 1 was coming out. And so like you will see a little bit of lag time with like where we want to push the environment, but for the most part we'll use the rules reference to cover any gaps if things go awry in the meantime.
Okay, super cool. All right, so let's ask some fun questions and we'll wrap this whole thing up. When we last talked, you specifically designed Luke and Vader to be like this thematic design where one draws cards, one discards cards. Did you do that in Spirit of Rebellion? And what since we've seen the whole set, like what are the cards like that work together to create that really thematic juncture?
Right. We do. I don't know if there's a straight like parallel between like a hero and a villain like there is with Luke and Vader in Spirit of Rebellion, but like we do a lot of top-down design, which is different than bottom-up design. So like top-down design is kind of starting with the idea of the character, like who the character is, and then trying to find a mechanic that fits with them. Whereas bottom-up design would be like, oh, I have this cool idea for a mechanic, like who can we put it on? And so, even something like Maz Kanata was more of a top-down design where it's like, she has all this insight, she gives you advice, she allows you to do things more effectively and more efficiently than you could otherwise. and then her goggles kind of even like aid her and help her see further in it. And so that's why you see a lot of like Maz plus her goggles are good. And I think that sort of design is nice, where you have a unique card that you want to put on someone because it works well with them. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to kind of like play unique cards with like a character that makes sense, or put like a unique team together that makes sense, which is why like Chewbacca is 12-16, just like Leia was 12-16 in the first set. So you can run Elite Chewbacca and Han, or Elite Han and one Chewbacca, and it's kind of up to you like which way you want to go.
Okay. And then, of course, the classic question. What's exciting you, like, specifically, what's your favorite card from Spirit of Rebellion? You're just like, I'm so excited for this guy.
Oh, man, that's a tough question. Favorite card from Spirit of Rebellion? I don't have one. I really don't. Favorites are hard to choose. Like, it would probably change tomorrow or change the next time I built a deck. I am really excited about putting Vibro Knives into my double Padawan Akbar deck, so I can remove some of the hold-up blasters that are taking up the range damage that I really want to be melee damage. So that'll be a fun card, and I know there's already a lot of discussion about how good that card is, and I think...
You're a terrible person.
I know. I think you'll see it a lot.
All right, and then the last question. We've got Worlds coming up in a few weeks. People are starting to test their gauntlet. They're trying to figure out, the meta, what to do. What's a piece of advice you can give them, since you've seen hundreds of games, you've seen people do good things, bad things, middle ground things. Someone is just trying to figure out, like, what can I do to improve my game? What would you say to that person?
I think one of the things that you really have to figure out is, like, what is your ideal starting hand for a deck, and what is your ideal starting hand for your deck against a matchup that you think you'll have. So, like, usually anytime I play my deck, like, I know the 5 cards that I'm looking for. And sometimes, like, the combination can change. So, like, sometimes, for example, I'm playing my double Padawan Akbar deck, and it's like I'm looking for 2 weapons. Like, that's priority number 1. I need 2 weapons. I don't care what they are, but maybe I draw 3 weapons. Then I'm like, okay, I know out of the 3 weapons, I'm looking for a 1-cost and a 2-cost weapon, because that allows me 1 resource left. And then I might ditch all the other weapons just to try to get some logistics or something else in order to bump my economy up first turn with Akbar, and then drop more things. But, like, you always want to have an idea of, like, if I could choose 5 cards, what are those cards going to be? And making sure that you make the right mulligan decision is important, because if you don't make the right mulligan decision, like, sometimes you get off to a slow start. And I think especially once Spirit of Rebellion hits, like, that's going to be really dangerous if you get off to a slow start in a game. Like, you're going to want to find your 5 cards, and you're going to want to get certain things out onto the table. So I think, thinking about what you want to start is good, and then thinking about, like, how are you going to beat Han Rey, and how are you going to beat, like, Vader Raider, because those are 2 of the more popular decks that people have been playing, and there will be a lot of people playing them because it's a very established deck type that people know how to play and know is good. And so I think you have to have an answer for that, and then also maybe an answer for Jango, Bala, and Trooper.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. Greatly appreciate your time, and we'll see you in a couple weeks of Worlds.
All right, see you there. Thanks.
So with that being said, that's pretty much the end of the show. Once again, big thank you to Lukas for his time. Thank you once again to Zach Bunn from Team Covenant. Those guys are awesome. We really love their products. We love their content. Check them out at teamcovenant.com, or you can find them on, Facebook, Twitter. Just look them up at Team Covenant. They've got some tokens that we've done a review on, and I mean, we like them quite a bit. And, if you haven't gotten a copy, definitely check them out. I mean, they also have really great content on Destiny. They just started doing a video podcast where they discussed DICE. That was their last show, and, it was really nice to get them to talk about DICE in relation to Destiny. So give them a, shout out, check them out. Once again, big thanks for Zach's time. And do you guys have anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
Yeah, so I wasn't able to make it to the event this weekend, but I want to give a shout out to the event at Outflank Games. My playtest partner and good friend Peter Park, he took the whole event. I believe he said there were 12 people, so not the largest event, but he's been, trying for a really long time, and he always usually hovered in like the 4 through 8 range, so it was really cool to see him take the whole event. He played Vader Raider, and so I wanted to make sure I gave him the proper shout out because he's a great dude. So good job, man.
Yeah, congratulations. So that's the end of the show, and we are so excited for everyone listening. Thank you so much for your time and your support. We are going to be seeing most of you at Worlds, and boy, we are just so excited. So tune in next week to hear who wins some promos. We're going to talk about all kinds of fun things, and may the Force be with you.